Hello everyone and welcome to Sinful Gaming. I hope you're all doing well, I hope you're all staying safe, and most of all, I hope you're all fighting that war against the Grey. Today's video, we're going to take a look at some armies that are in desperate need of an update in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. A lot of the armies have been updated over in the past couple of years, but a few of those books potentially have fallen, I guess, a little bit flat, not necessarily hit the mark entirely, or some of these are just plain older than the others. All of this can combine to a myriad of different things, needing a book to want and need an update. And what an update can do for a book is give them a new life. It can allow units that previously didn't make the tabletop to make the tabletop. It can allow that army to actually be on the tabletop in a competitive scene as well. And really, that's the place we all want. Now, I don't want every army to be completely overpowered. Like, no one wants that in the game. What I would much rather is I would rather armies be completely all centered in that what people refer to as the fat middle. Now, there are a bunch of armies that currently lie in there. You've got things like, say, Cities of Sigmar, Ogre tribes, Caradron Overlords probably fit in here still just a little bit, just due to their, I guess, swinginess of the army on how it can perform. But in general, most of the armies in the game do fit in here. There's definitely some that are lower, and there are definitely some that are higher. And also, another sort of thing is when an army doesn't play like it should on the tabletop. I did a video talking about how armies represent the lore on the tabletop, and some that do it really well and some that don't. And so I really hope that those armies that don't represent their lore on the tabletop well can actually start doing that to make them not only better, but feel better as you're playing them. So anyway, we're going to look at 5 armies that need an update in Warhammer Age of Sigmar today, and they're going to be for a bunch of different reasons. But let's get cracking into the list. Alright, so this is the format we're going to do for all the different armies we're going to talk about in this video. And so I've got the army's name here and all that sort of stuff, and we've also picked out a few units that I think are really major culprits of why the army book needs an update. Now, so to start with, we're going to talk about the army book, and then we'll talk about particular units within that army book. And so, number 1, I have Beasts of Chaos. Now, Beasts of Chaos, for me, are just one of those armies that just feel lackluster on the table. They don't have that savage ferocity. They play Age of Sigmar in a very different way if they have to play in a competitive manner, where they just try and take up the board space. They do have some really cool thematic rules, though, that really suit the army's theme. Like the ambush rule is really cool, and I like how you can play in Darkwalkers and make other types of monster ambush as well. I also like the part where it's got that sort of demi-subfaction bit where you get all the rules for Minotaurs, Dragon Ogres, and the Brayherd stuff, depending on what you've taken within your force. Beasts of Chaos, they just have a lot of bad war scrolls, and that is really, I guess, the major thing about this book. There's only so much you can drop points and stuff before it becomes ridiculous. I mean, things like some of the monsters, and we'll get talking about them in a bit, can only go so low before they just become a ridiculous points, and they just should never be that low points cost. I have the general position of thinking that you shouldn't lower a model's points cost, you should make its rules better to fit the points cost you think it should have. And so let's start talking about those major culprit units in Beasts of Chaos. To start with, we have the Gore, and the Gore suffer from, I guess, a thing that a lot of similar units in a bunch of different books suffer from, and that is that they are neither a cheap chaff unit nor the elite heavy hitters. And so I liken this, say, to other units where maybe they feel the same thing, where you've got things like you have Chaos Warriors, who are neither elite troops like Vanguard, Chaos Knights, or Chaos Chosen, but they are also neither cheap like Marauders and all the different cultist units, and so they fall in that weird middle ground and don't really do either job. Gore don't do either. I mean, Ungor are ridiculously cheap, and even Ungor Raiders have shooting which the Gores do not. And then Best of Gores just hit that much harder for barely any more points. I think the fix for Gore for me comes with maybe they decide to give them a bit more ambush specialized rules, where you make these guys the units that you do leave in ambush. While they're never going to be the heaviest hitters, they're never going to be the hardiest unit on the table, if you give them a bunch of bonuses to make sure they land those charges, actually give them rules similar to what Chaos Marauders might have, then they become a very viable unit, I think. The next thing that's a really big culprit in Beasts of Chaos, and I've got a picture of Sigor because he is probably the worst example in the book for this, but in general it's all the monsters in the book in its entirety. None of them hit like they do. They constantly see points drops over and over again, and this I think is just getting to the point of where some of them are at ridiculously low points cost for what they should be. Instead, these units should be getting better war scores. They should be getting more rules, more rend, more attacks, more damage potential, more just everything, really, and make them worth the points they were initially printed at, instead of just continuously lowering the points because they become so low it's almost a joke. Dragon Ogres I've got next, and they fall into the same sort of role. Much like the monsters, both Dragon Ogres, and I guess we can include Bulgors to a lesser extent though than Dragon Ogres, which are supposed to be the heavy, elite, hard-hitting troops in the army, and they just fall flat at that mark. Bestigors are nearly always better than both those unit options. I guess Minotaurs do have some of the Immortal Wound potential, but Bestigors just generally do that job better, and they can Bray Herd so they can ambush and all that sort of stuff as well. Just stuff that the Dragon Ogres don't get. Dragon Ogres have a random rule where they move an extra d6. Why not just make this a flat number? I mean, even if it was like a flat 3, it would still be better than d6. It's a guaranteed 3, which is awesome. And the other things they have, they don't feel any role. They're too cheap for what they should be, but they're not good enough for their points cost. And lastly, the last unit I've got here are the basic Zangor. I think Enlightened and Skyfires are generally fine, along with the Zangor Shaman as well, but it's Zangor that are really the worst out of all the Tzeentch-based stuff. What happened to Zangors is not necessarily Beasts of Chaos' fault. At a time when the book was printed, Tzeentch was one of the heavy armies in the meta, or at least was coming off that back of being one of the heavy armies in the meta. It didn't really see any nerfs to the War Scrolls of Zangor. And so because Zangor were really good in Tzeentch, they got a bit of a nerf in Beasts of Chaos, and they really haven't ever seen the table in any numbers since because of this, at least in a competitive sense. For me, I'd like to see Zangors go back to that really hard-hitting offensive unit they were. It was amazing to see on the table, and really, I don't think it does any harm having that unit available in Tzeentch when you've got so many limited points because you're pouring them into things like horrors and all your characters. I think the way that maybe we need to look at this thing where units are in two different books is actually adjusting the cost for the two different units in the different books. So the ability, I guess, would be that Tzeentch maybe pay more because they do more in Tzeentch when you've got the ability to take Destiny dice, while they do less in Beasts of Chaos because you lose a bunch of those abilities that come with being a Tzeentch model. But anyway, this is a bunch of reasons why I think Beasts of Chaos definitely fit into this list, and so let's get cracking onto the next army. Number 2, we have Stormcast Eternals. Now, this one comes a bit from age. Stormcast Eternals were the very first army alongside Nighthaunt, released at the very start of Age of Sigmar 2.0, and it's been that long since we've seen an update properly for them. They did, of course, get a bunch of extra rules that I think helped them somewhat to be a little bit better, at least put them up to very low, middle sort of the road army, with the Broken Realms Marathi rules giving them the Stormkeep abilities, but they still have some glaring flaws and weaknesses and have a huge range of models that just do not see the table. Stormcast Eternals do have one of the biggest ranges of models in Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and there's so many of them that are just bad that don't see the table at all. I think there's a multitude of different things going wrong for Stormcast Eternals, really, and I think one is a lack of decent War Scroll battalions. Now, I get that all their War Scroll battalions are meant to be very thematic, as are all War Scroll battalions, but maybe they need a bit of a tuning, either points adjustments or some better abilities in general for them. They also have, for the most part, a glaring issue with one sub-faction being so superior to all the others that it just makes everything else, I guess, irrelevant. This is a similar problem we've seen with other armies where if you actually have other decent options but one is just so much better, we've seen this happen with things like Ossiarch Bone Reapers and the Petrifex Elite issue, or things with Daughters of Cain and Hagnar where they're just so much better you don't see the others taken, even if they are okay at least. Now, Stormcast Eternals, as mentioned, they have just a huge range of models, and I'm going to touch on a few here that I think are the biggest offenders in the entire book for not doing what they should be doing, or just not doing anything in the case of some of them. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is going to be the Paladin units, especially those from the Warrior Chamber. So I'm talking about Retributors, Decimators, and Protectors. Now, these units here are supposed to be your elite, hard-hitting infantry. In the early days of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, they filled this role amazing. Retributors were rightly feared across the tabletop when Warhammer Age of Sigmar rules first hit out. They were awesome. However, as time's gone on, the War Scroll has just been surpassed by everything. And I think it's been surpassed in everything, even that at the low end of the scale. Like, I get that some units maybe do too many Wardle runes and stuff like that, but in general, these Paladins don't do anything near that. They're not even middle of the road, they're just bad. And so I would like to see these units maybe tanked up. And in general, I think Stormcast Eternals can maybe use with maybe some 3-up armor saves on units like this to really make them feel like the immovable, destructive warriors that they are. We've then got the Prosecutors. Now, I don't think there's a worse offender in the entire Stormcast Eternals range than Prosecutors, because outside of one battalion, which is okay-ish at best, Prosecutors have no role in an army. Yes, they have ridiculous range. They can charge 3d6, but they will die to anything they charge, even a basic chaff unit. They have absolutely zero defensive ability. They don't put out much offense at all. For me, they're just terrible, and it's a shame because they are one of the coolest things, I think, in Stormcast Eternals. When the original box for Warhammer Age of Sigmar launched, the Prosecutors were arguably one of the coolest units. They're one of the ones that people wanted more than anything in that box set. And they don't hold up anymore. Even the shooting variations, we used to see them quite a bit with the javelins and stuff like that, just don't do anything at all anymore. And I really need, I think, this War Scroll just to get a massive, massive update. And that can be said for a lot of Warrior Chambers stuff in general, I think. Vanguard Paladors are next, and for me, they fall into that sort of middle of the road role. They're neither light cavalry, and they're neither heavy cavalry like the Dracothian Guard or the Evocators on Celestial Dracolines. For me, Paladors probably should push more towards being a cheaper cavalry unit. I get that they're supposed to be a Paladin unit for the Vanguard Chamber, but really maybe make them a bit lighter, make them fast, like they've got all the speed that they've got, but maybe, I don't know what you do with them to make them worth taking compared to the other heavy cavalry units without dropping their points to too low that it becomes ridiculous, I guess. I think in general you maybe need to push the mounts being a little bit more lethal potentially, and maybe give them some cool hit and run abilities to really fix their War Scroll. Lastly though, we have the Star Drake, and this for me is okay in some instances, but it doesn't play how I think this giant dragon should do. The Star Drake is a great defensive piece. He has a bunch of good defensive abilities and can do some mortal wound output board wide at range. But what he really lacks is some decent combat potential. This thing cannot fight its way out of much in the game. That's really disappointing for a model that is as impressive as it is on the tabletop in its look and stature. The main thing I think this comes from is how its jaw is taken away entirely from it, and it's given this random attack that can only kill 6 wound models and either does everything or nothing. And so you have other creatures where they have this jaw attack or stuff them down their pants, like the Gargants and stuff, that they get this in addition. And I think that's the way it should be. I think we should have a mount attack with its jaws on the dragon itself, and then have the swallow hole rule on top of that. And I think this would maybe deal with some of the issues of damage output that the Star Drake has. But that's Stormcast Eternals in a nutshell. I think they do need some serious rework. Broken Realms Marathi definitely did go a good way to helping and pushing some ideas to really show you how we can fix them, but it definitely didn't do them entirely. Number 3, and we've got the Sylvaneth. And the Sylvaneth are the newest battle tome to feature in my list. And for me, they've got a bunch of different problems. Straight away, Sylvaneth have already a major issue with getting new players into the army, and that is the wildwoods that are needed for playing the army. You need to spend a ton on just normal boring old trees just to play your army of tree people. Now, I really like the mechanic on how the trees spawn across the table and all that sort of stuff. Like, it's a cool mechanic, but maybe we need to think of a way that's more economical to players to be able to get into the army to play with that. Maybe make it so that there's other ways. Maybe you only start with one forest and you instead corrupt, or I guess imbue terrain features with your abilities and stuff, and use the terrain instead of having to buy an obscene amount of trees. But Sylvaneth are also, I guess, one of the armies that need some updates on their War Scrolls. For starters, we have the Tree Lord and Tree Lord Ancient. Spirited Durthu isn't too bad, though he does fall, I guess, for some of the same sort of things, and it's maybe you can put him on this list, I guess, as well, but for me, it's definitely these two that stand out more than anything. Both of them just don't do much damage. For these massive lumbering tree behemoths, they just don't do much damage at all. And I think the worst part of any of this about the offense is for the Tree Lord Ancient. This is a ancient Tree Lord. He is millennia year old, and this amazing wizard that's grown entire forests around him and protect his people for countless generations. And he's a one-cast wizard. This to me is just it's silly. Like, he should be a 2, if not a 3 caster. Like, I would love to see this model go up there and be one of the great monster casters in the game, because I truly think the lore makes him deserve it. They're supposed to be amazing. They're supposed to be able to grow and control entire forests at a whim. And, well, a 1-cast wizard just doesn't seem to do that to me. I get that he's slow and lumbering, but surely his magical potential when he's fully awakened can be better. We then have the Tree Revenants, who are an interesting unit. They have some really cool abilities, like their ability to redeploy all across the table, and they're not too shabby, especially when you start getting some of the buffs from the things like the Arch Revenant into them. But I do think maybe they could be a little bit more offensive. If we've got the Dryads in the army, which really are a much more defensive unit, they stick around forests and they hand out penalties to hit. I think we need to make the Tree Revenants that little bit more offensive. Maybe give them some bonuses to charge if they charge out of terrain or something, to really make that teleport useful on the table that little bit more, rather than just stealing objectives. If you had a unit of 10 of these that get, like, say, +3 to a charge if they've deep struck within an inch of terrain, maybe they get a little bit more use on the tabletop and gives them a bit more of a role. All in all, though, I think the worst thing in the entire Sylvaneth book is the fact Alarielle, a god, is just not good. Like, she has a ton wrong with her. I mean, the beetle can do a bunch of damage when it charges, but she herself just has no damage protection whatsoever, and she dies to a swift breeze. This is the goddess of life. She should be the one just unable to die. And so I've had ideas from a bunch of different people that we've talked about, and maybe the one to fix Alarielle is to give her the ability to regenerate like a phoenix. If you take her down to 0 wounds, she simply comes back with, say, 2d6 wounds, or she comes back with half the amount of wounds she started with before she died. So if she starts on 16 wounds, for example, she then comes back the first time at 8 wounds, and then if she dies again, she comes back at 4 to 2 to 1 to none. You know what I mean? It just makes her have this little bit more ability to stay on the table. And it's not that broken a rule, I don't think. Maybe this is the way to fix her. She definitely needs maybe some more magical potential as well. And, well, this is supposed to be her war aspect, so maybe give her a bit more combat potential in there as well. Maybe we change the lore in the next couple of times, and maybe the war aspect of Alarielle wanes, and her, I guess, fertility aspect or her mothering aspect comes into play, and we get a bit more of, I guess, the army-wide healing around her that starts to grow. But she definitely does need a bit of work on her war scroll, as she is probably the worst god in the game at current. Number 4, we have Nighthaunt. Nighthaunt are an army that are in desperate need of an update. Very similar to Stormcast Eternals. As I mentioned, they are the very first 2 armies that came out straight off the bat in Age of Sigmar 2.0. Now, Nighthaunt suffer from a few different things. First of all, they're the only army in the game now at current that has 0 sub-factions in any form whatsoever. They have absolutely nothing. I mean, the closest they get is they have the Emerald Host that is in a White Dwarf. I believe I've got the name of that correct. Anyway, they've got a White Dwarf faction, but that is all they've got, and really it doesn't give them all that much extra, and they still only have that as an option, where other armies just have a variety of different options in this particular area. The other thing that Nighthaunt suffer from is their allegiance ability is a random ability. They have this thing where they get all these bonuses when they get to charge, and if they land a charge with a particular role, they get to make attacks in the charge phase and then in the combat phase again, which is a cool mechanic. However, there's very little in the army that actually does much to help build on this sort of thing as a strategy. You have, I guess, the Hex Race that get a bunch of stuff when they start taking in their own battalion, where they get these bonuses and all that to it, but there's little else in the whole army. Now, this is where things like the Khan Wraith and the Tomb Banshee, I think, come into this. Both these characters are just minor characters that have absolutely no purpose whatsoever. They're very cheap, and I guess that is some sort of purpose, that they can be little pinions, I guess, throughout your army, points of deathless saves throughout the army, but it really isn't anything major. They do die to a swift breeze. What I think these characters should do is they should be linking up with their associated units. So the Khan Wraith should be giving a bunch of bonuses to Grimghast Reapers, and the Tomb Banshee should be giving some bonuses to the Murmurn Banshees or the Dreadscythe Harridans. I think this is a way to fix these 2 characters, make them, give them something, or even maybe if they deploy up from the underworld, they give charge bonuses to those units. Maybe they give +3 to the rule where you get the attack in the combat, in the charge phase instead of the combat phase, or something like that, to help make those units land those charges easier and actually give these models a point of use in the army properly. Next, we have the Black Coach as well, which is another model that I just can't explain why it doesn't have a particular rule. Why is it not a hero? It's got a vampire sitting in that coffin. It's also got a can wraith on the actual coach driving it. Why is it not a hero? I think this is the single way you fix a Black Coach, is make it a hero, enable it to be able to take a bunch of different artifacts. And what this also does is give Nighthaunt a hero that doesn't die to a swift breeze. Nighthaunt's biggest issue is that all their heroes, besides obviously the named characters, which can't take artifacts or command traits, if they want them to be the general, they generally don't have that much survivability outside of their ethereal rule. The Black Coach has a ton more wounds on it, and I think this sort of solves the issue of needing a more survivable hero to lead your force. If you give it the hero keyword, it fixes a bunch of issues. Lastly, we're going to talk about Lady Alinda. Now, she's okay. She has some definite play and use within the army in general, but for me, she just doesn't hit the mark of what she should be doing versus what she does in the lore. She just doesn't hit that sort of height on the table that she does in the stories. She is, at current, the only known character to have defeated the Celestin Prime, the once undefeated hero of the Stormcast Eternals and Sigmar in the lore, and well, we know how much it takes to beat Stormcast Eternals in the lore. Lady Alinda actually succeeded. She defeated the unbeaten champion of Sigmar, and it doesn't really reflect this in the rules at all. I mean, the Celestin Prime himself is not fantastic, but Lady Alinda should be better, and probably so should the Celestin Prime as well. Maybe we should have mentioned him in Stormcast at some point as well. But I feel she maybe needs a little bit of a buff. Maybe put her up even points and give her more rules. Make her more lethal in combat. Show us how she managed to defeat the undefeated in combat. And so, number 5, we have Maggotkin of Nurgle. And the primary reason I think that they need an update for the book is simply because they've got too many books at the moment. So, at the current point in time, and we're going to have another one soon, you've got needing the Maggotkin of Nurgle book. You've then got the Wrath of the Everchosen book, which has additional rules for Nurgle. And you're soon about to have a Broken Realms book as well. Not to mention some of their major war scrolls have seen updates, like the Putrid Blight Kings as well. This to me is just a clear mark for needing a new book. When you need a bunch of different books to play one army, why not update the book and make it one? We've had things like this come out, especially even recently, where we got the new Lumineth Realmlords book straight away with Broken Realms tech list, where we have the ability to either play with 2 books if we've already got the old book, or buy a brand new book to have 1 book to carry around. This is exactly what they should be doing with Maggotkin of Nurgle, and I think it's really due time. Not only that though, Maggotkin of Nurgle have a few glaring issues within their army. Now, I do think a lot of the things have been fixed with FAQs, some of the different battalions and sub-factions that have been given. We know that Maggotkin of Nurgle in their book do not have sub-faction, but Wrath the Everchosen did give them to them, and maybe a couple more in there might just be cool. If you can all compile them into one book, that would be great. But a big glaring issue for me is some of their characters are just not great. I think this is Nurgle's greatest weakness. They have some decent troops like the Puskal Blight Lords, the Blight Kings, and even things like Plague Bearers and Nurglings are all pretty decent in what they do, but their heroes are where it really gets a bit lackluster. You've got a few different cool named characters that can do a bit of work, things like Rotigus and the pirate captain whose name eludes me. We've got the different characters that help you in the battalions as well that are all pretty decent. But you've got things like Glotkin, the Magath Lords, like Damon Spew and Orbitex Twiceborn, etc. And things like the Sloppity Bilepiper as well that really just don't do much for the army in general. I know that all of these have, I guess, different little things they can do for the army, and Glotkin is okay in a way, but for me they all just fall a little bit flat and really don't give as much to taking, I guess, more units, and I'd love to see these units on the table more. Perhaps the worst offenders of this are the Magath Lords that just serve absolutely no role within the army at the moment, and I'd really like to see them get some updated war scrolls. Beasts of Nurgle are another one that's just got a bad war scroll in all essence. I don't think they do much. I don't think they can do much with their current war scroll, even if you put them down at some ridiculous points value. I definitely think they need a little bit of a change to make them the sick, deluded danger puppies that they are. And well, the last question is, what do you think of our list? Are there any that we missed that you think desperately need an update, like these factions, and maybe should be in here instead of one of the factions we mentioned? We try to leave this at 5 and make it a top 5 to really sort of show these factions we believe need it the most. But I'd be interested to hear any you think were needed in this list, but I'd also like to hear what they would replace in the list as well. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Well, thank you all for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to come chat more with me and other members of our little community here at Sinful Gaming, you can do so by coming and joining our Discord server, which you'll find a link to in the description of the video. While you're on YouTube as well, go check out my featured channel section, which contains a bunch of other fantastic Age of Sigmar content creators doing everything from battle reports, tactical videos, lore videos, painting tutorials, and more besides that. Lastly though, we'd like to give a shout out to everyone who helps support the channel via Patreon and YouTube members. Thank you to James, AJC, JC, Christian Weir, Soren, Kenny Lowell, Outer and Shot First, Cowspawn, James Crowder, and Andrew Bowen. Thank you all so much for your support. And if you'd like to help support the channel like these fine people do, you can do so by clicking once again on the links down in the description of the video to either YouTube members or Patreon. Thank you all for supporting the channel though, watching the content. Have a nice day, stay safe, stay well, and most of all, keep fighting that war against the Grey. Ciao for now.